Shout out to Ring RQ, Julius, you legend. We're going to do a joint interview, yeah? Yeah, we'll do a joint interview, Julius. Thanks for the support. You're a legend. From your girls, Raven and Ellie.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend picks. South of the border. I've already discussed the upcoming Yamileth Mercado versus Barbie Juarez fight at length in great detail. I am going with Yami Mercado to retain her green belt against the aging fighter Barbie Juarez south of the border in the United Kingdom across the pond. One of my favorite fighters, Ellie Scottney.
Catfish.
She's going to be taking on Spain's own Mary Romero for what is Mary Romero's EBU title, and I think Ellie Scottney,
Catfish.
she's got the minerals, she's got the experience, and she has what she needs to secure a points decision tomorrow against Mary Romero on the undercard of Taylor versus Carbajal.
Catfish.
And when it comes to the main event of that same card, the undisputed lightweight title fight between the reigning champion Katie Taylor and the unbeaten challenger of Argentina, Karen Carbajal. I'll keep it short, I'll keep it simple. She is a bit younger than Katie Taylor, a little taller, a little longer, but she's also a bit slower. Her punches, they're a bit wider. Her feet do seem a bit heavier than Katie. She's not the kind of fighter that fights on the balls of her feet. Quite the opposite. She's the kind of fighter that marches forward. Steps into her jab in order to invade the pocket. I feel that Katie Taylor, perhaps Karen Carbajal's height and length might trouble Katie a bit, just a bit, but same token, there are a lot of countering opportunities there. You often hear it said that Katie's not as fast as she used to be, and maybe she's not, but she's still faster than Karen. And that's all she needs to be. That's all she needs to be the night of the fight. In and out, on the balls of her feet, on her toes, just 1 and 2 punches at a time. Judicious, economic, with the occasional flurry, the occasional 3 and 4 punch combination. Angles and movement. Angles, movement, and counter shots. Win Katie Taylor this fight. Win Katie Taylor this fight on points. Katie's about 4 years older than Karen Carbajal, but there's no question who's fought the better, more skilled fighters. There's no question who comes from the more decorated, amateur, and professional background. And to the eye, even if Katie Taylor isn't quite as fast as she used to be, to the eye here today, she still looks faster than Karen Carbajal. Karen, who saw action earlier this year in April, Katie Taylor saw action the same month against Amanda Serrano. Their showdown. They're on the same schedule. Neither fighter has any ring rust to shake off. Karen Carbajal is actually moving up in weight for this fight. From super feather, that's 130 pounds, up to 135 pounds, up to lightweight. Given her physical dimensions, I think she'll feel a bit more invigorated not having to cut down the extra 5 pounds to make super featherweight. She'll feel a little bit more energetic, a bit more solid, stronger. Yeah, she might feel good at the weight, but characteristically, she doesn't exhibit the variety of punches that Katie Taylor exhibits, certainly doesn't have the same level of experience. On her feet, she doesn't cut angles the same way that Katie does. So I see a situation to where, so long as Katie Taylor stays on the balls of her feet, on her toes, in and out, cutting those angles and hitting Karen with punches that she doesn't see, she can exhibit the neater, tidier work in the eyes of the judges and win a points decision. Karen Carbajal's an unbeaten fighter, so needless to say, she's never been knocked out. I'm not banking on a knockout tomorrow. Maybe a knockdown. Maybe Katie Taylor can hit her with something she don't see and put her on the canvas, but for the most part, I expect that Karen will arrive at this weight solid. Karen's not that fast on her feet, doesn't have the fastest hands, isn't the biggest puncher, she only has 2 recorded knockouts. She is a good, solid, and serviceable unbeaten fighter. There are worse fighters to keep busy with, believe you me. And because Katie Taylor's coming off that war with Amanda Serrano, where she took a lot of hard shots, and just all the wars that Katie Taylor has been in over the years, the war with Jessica McCaskill, the wars with Delphine Persoon and Christina Lenardatu, Natasha Jonas, and more recently, Amanda Serrano, there is a question as to how is Katie Taylor going to look, because she's not getting any younger. And I understand that, but I've got faith in Katie in this scenario, I do. I think she can manage this situation. She needed to take her foot off the gas a bit. She wanted to go right back into a rematch situation with Amanda Serrano. And Amanda Serrano went her own way to do her own thing. And that's all well and good, but that more or less tells you where Katie Taylor's head is at. She is a competitor. In spite of the arduous war that she had with Amanda, she wanted to run it back, even though she won the fight. She's a supreme competitor, and I trust that tomorrow she can and will win a points decision against Karen Carbajal and give her her first professional loss. We then come to the main event of the top-ranked card set to go down tomorrow night. Vasyl Lomachenko's big ring return against unbeaten southpaw, his former sparring partner, Jermaine Ortiz, a guy who I think is a little bit better than advertised.
You know, a lot of people are saying that because Vasyl Lomachenko used to spar this guy, that gives Vasyl Lomachenko an edge, but the pendulum swings both ways. Whatever edge he gets from that, it's an edge that Jermaine Ortiz...
It's an edge he also gets. If you're saying that because he used to spar the guy, he has insights on how to beat him, the same is true in reverse.
You know, a lot of people, they're interpreting this as some kind of gimme fight, but I don't see it that way. I anticipate that this might be a little bit more difficult than the Komei and Nakatani fights were.
Richard Komei and Masayoshi Nakatani were a bit more crude than what you see in Jermaine Ortiz. Nicknamed the Technician, he is just that, a fundamentally sound fighter who's got some things to him.
I don't know why they have him registered as an orthodox fighter. He's not an orthodox fighter. He does a bit of switch hitting, but for the most part, he's a southpaw.
At least he fought that way when last I saw him. Earlier this year against Jamel Herring, the former champion, former WBO champion at super featherweight, who moved up in weight to lightweight, took on Jermaine Ortiz and was overwhelmed by him. You know, Jermaine Ortiz, he's not half bad, to be completely honest. He's got more nuances and subtleties than either Richard
Komei or Masayoshi Nakatani. I get the impression that Vasyl Lomachenko is going to have to pull more tricks out of his trick bag to beat this guy. He's going to have to work for it with this guy more so than he did with those two guys.
This guy's 8 years younger than Vasyl Lomachenko. A little bigger, a little longer, certainly fresher, and more active. Jermaine Ortiz has already seen action 2 times this year. This kid's going to be sharp tomorrow. He's going to be sharp the night of the fight.
Whereas Vasyl Lomachenko sports a professional record of 16 wins with 2 losses, no draws, and 11 knockouts. He hasn't fought in about 10 months, and he's the older fighter in the fight. He's in his mid-30s.
I don't get the sense that Jermaine Ortiz is cannon fodder, simply cannon fodder for a guy who's been out of action for the better portion of a year. No, sir, I think he's going to have to work for it tomorrow. Perhaps a little harder than he did with Richard Komei and Masayoshi Nakatani. It makes for a great fight, and this is Vasyl
This is Lomachenko's chance to show that he's still got it. He's still got what it takes, and he's still competing at the elite level ahead of what could be a Devin Haney undisputed lightweight showdown. Because if you can't make it past the Jermaine Ortizes of the world, fat fucking chance you beat Devin Haney.
Gotta beat Jermaine Ortiz first to prove you've still got it. Jermaine Ortiz, who sports a professional record of 16 wins, no losses with 1 draw, 8 knockouts. Not the biggest puncher, but definitely the younger, fresher, and somewhat bigger fighter in the fight.
That draw was with Joseph Adorno.
Back there a couple of fights ago. More recently, he was last in action earlier this year against Jamel Herring, and he looked the part. He looked impressive. He looked solid.
Jermaine Ortiz fights out of the southpaw stance, does a bit of switch hitting, moves well, inside and outside of the pocket.
He can fight from a variety of ranges. He has enough length that he can box from the outside if the situation calls for it, but he is quite effective mid-range to inside, deep in the pocket. Shows a bit of body punching,
slipping, rolling, and riding punches, countering in kind, good speed, good feet.
As far as the difficulty level of tomorrow night's lightweight contest, I expect this to be a somewhat more difficult fight for Vasyl Lomachenko than Richard Komei was, than Masayoshi Nakatani. I'd say it's somewhere in between those fights and the Luke Campbell fight. You know, Luke Campbell gave Vasyl Lomachenko some problems. Big kid. He was a southpaw.
Except you have to remember that was several years ago. That was a younger Vasyl Lomachenko than the one that stands before us here today. And Vasyl Lomachenko, leading up to that fight, he was actually more active then than he is now. He's coming off a 10-month layoff now.
How the fight's going to look and how the fight's going to play out is hard to tell because Vasyl Lomachenko has some disadvantages here, and there is that X factor when it comes to Jermaine Ortiz, a guy who's fighting in what is, at least up until this point, the biggest fight of his career. Can he hit another gear?
Some fighters, they rise to the occasion. Some fighters, they tend to do that as they step up in class.
You got to figure that in the early goings of this thing, for at least the first 2 to 3 rounds, Vasyl Lomachenko is going to be shaking off ring rust.
Before he gets into a groove, before he starts cutting angles and throwing punches from awkward angles.
And before he ups the tempo and starts throwing punches in bunches to overwhelm the guy with activity from these different angles, awkward angles. And because Jermaine Ortiz, he's a switch hitter and he fights out of the southpaw stance, cutting those angles, well, it might be a little bit more difficult with this guy than some other guys. Tack on the 10 months of inactivity, and I'm expecting to see a competitive fight tomorrow. I'd be surprised if Vasyl Lomachenko beats this guy easy. I'd be surprised if he stops him.
I would. Vasyl Lomachenko's a great guy. He's a great fighter, but he's only human, and there are some things working against him in this fight. At least a few things.
So you know. I'm going to go with Vasyl Lomachenko to win this thing on points. Conservatively, I think that he still has enough that he can perhaps win the fight. But I don't know. I just don't anticipate that this is going to be a walk in the park. I don't anticipate this is going to be easy. Now, Golden Boy Promotions also has a show happening tomorrow night. The Zepeda versus Diaz fight, the lightweight contest, a step up in class for Zepeda.
And on the undercard, we're going to be seeing the IBF Flyweight title fight between the reigning champion, Leonela Paola Yudica, and Mexico's own former champion, Arely Muciño.
Talked about this fight in the past. Arely Muciño, the former champion who sports a professional record of 31 wins with 3 losses, 2 draws, and 11 knockouts, having only ever been knocked out once, just once, by Ava Knight.
You'll excuse me for saying so, but Leonela Paola Yudica is not the puncher that Ava Knight is. There's not much chance of Leonela knocking out Arely Muciño tomorrow.
It's tricky because Arely Muciño, nicknamed
La Ametralladora,
the Machine Gun.
I've seen her last couple of fights, and she doesn't seem like the same offensive whirlwind that she used to be, but I still think she has enough to, at minimum, outwork Leonela Paola Yudica, a solid unbeaten champion.
She is sporting a professional record of 18 wins with no losses and 3 draws, just 1 knockout, 1 recorded knockout. This is what I mean. She's really not a puncher.
So long as Arely Muciño bears some semblance of the fighter that she used to be, I think she can effectively outwork and thereby outpoint Leonela Paola Yudica. I think she can.
Leonela, who only fought once, just once, late last year in November, she returned to action in September of this year against journeywoman level opponent Lucia Ruiz.
Arely has been comparatively a bit more active. She fought 2 times last year, 2 times, and she's already seen action at least once this year.
The basic idea here is that if Arely Muciño emerges the victor, if she is successful and she pries the blue belt away from Leonela Paola Yudica, they will then match her against their unified champion, Marlen Esparza, both Golden Boy Promotions fighters. That's right. Arely Muciño is the house fighter in this. She has home field advantage, and characteristically, she is more of a combination puncher, more prolific than Leonela is.
She's coming off a second-round TKO win over Marisol Sanchez.
To the eye, she's the busier boxer, the busier puncher, and the more heavy-handed fighter.
Tail of the tape, they're about even.
But I think Arely Muciño has a couple of things working for her in this fight. You know, characteristically, she is a busier puncher, more heavy-handed.
She's been a little bit more active, and she is the house fighter. She has home field advantage.
I think she's got what it takes. I think she's got what it takes to win the fight and become the flyweight division's newly crowned IBF champion. Tomorrow, I think Arely Muciño is going to...
My prediction is Arely Muciño wins the fight on points. Now, when it comes to the main event...
Former champion Jojo Diaz versus unbeaten up-and-comer William Zepeda, a guy who's a real gun, a real puncher. 26 wins, no losses, no draws, with 23 knockouts.
Won 23 out of 26 fights by way of knockout. This guy can punch, and Jojo Diaz, God bless him, experienced guy that he might be.
You know, Jojo Diaz, he's fought as low as featherweight. He's fought as low as 126 pounds. Lost the fight to Gary Russell down there. Moved up to 130, moved up to 135. He hasn't proven to be a big puncher as a super featherweight or a lightweight.
Now, this might be a step up in class for William Zepeda. It might be, but he's still the naturally bigger guy and the bigger puncher. And given that Jojo Diaz, you know, he's no defensive wizard. He's no safety-first fighter.
He's offensively minded. Jojo Diaz, he saw action 3 times last year.
Sat out most of this year. This will be his first fight this year, whereas William Zepeda, comparatively, he's been a lot more active.
William saw action 2 times last year, and he's already seen action 2 times this year. So the night of the fight, he will be sharp.
At least I think he will be. Both William and Jojo, they're both southpaws, so neither man has that advantage over the other.
But like I said, stylistically, Joseph Diaz is not a defensively minded fighter. He's not a safety-first guy, quite the opposite. He's a mid-range to inside guy. Even though he's not a big puncher, he is a prolific puncher that likes to throw punches in bunches and crowd the other guy. You do that with William. You do that with William tomorrow, you're going to get yourself hurt. You're going to get yourself knocked out.
Oh, and I understand that Joseph Diaz has never been knocked out before in 3 weight classes where he's campaigned: featherweight, super featherweight, and lightweight. He's never been stopped.
Might not yet, but there's a first time for everything, and I think tomorrow, for the first time, Joseph Diaz is going to get stopped. He's going to get knocked out. I have William Zepeda by way of knockout or technical.